we'll do a little bit of background first. This story, of course, is found in John. And I will tell you, I don't have it in the notes, but I will tell you, because you'll see it also in the Bible, the Lamsa Bible, that this story and the very original scrolls, this story was not in it. Okay. But what they say is that then later it was added um, to the Aramaic text, and of course, hold on, of course, just a moment, I'm trying to, okay. All right, I lost that thought, but anyway, so it's oh, and then of course Dr. Lamsa kept it because he used the King James Bible to translate. So, but it has no significance when it comes to the meaning or whatnot. Um, okay, so the background. All right, in this story from John, the book of John. All right, Jesus was in Jerusalem and he was teaching at or in the temple. Now, why is this significant? We'll jump down to the third line here. Because Jesus mostly taught in Galilee and he was accepted there. Okay. Reason being, all right, Jesus himself was a Galilean. Okay. Remember, he's from Nazareth. Nazareth was in Galilee. And the problem, though, was that the Jews from Judah and Jerusalem hated the Galileans, all right, because they were a mixed group of people. They were Jewish by faith, but they were people from the northern 10 tribes that were captured, and then they were allowed to come back. But while they were there, they married into other than the Hebrews. And so anyway, so you have to keep that in mind, that they hated Galileans. They knew Jesus was a Galilean, and um, Jesus was challenged. Jesus challenged the laws of Moses, all right, and was under constant scrutiny by we'll say the authorities in Jerusalem. So when Jesus was in Jerusalem, he was having to be very careful, aware, and whatnot, because they were always after him. And so the other thing to remember, and not just for this story, but for all, is that, remember, back then there was no separation of church and state, okay, like we know. There just wasn't. And so um so we have to keep that in mind, particularly with this story, because the law and the religion, well, I mean, it was the same. And so therefore, you could get arrested for what we would know as offenses against the religion or whatever. And so we just need to keep that in mind with this story. Okay, I thought we would start by reading the story. It's only 11 verses, okay? And then we'll kind of break it down because there, like I say, there's a lot here culturally, a lot to learn about Jesus, and a lot that we can learn. So, all right. Then Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who was caught in adultery, and they made her to stand in the midst. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught openly in the act of adultery. Now, in the law of Moses, it is commanded that women such as these should be stoned. But what do you say?" What was Jesus going to say? They said this to tempt him, that they might have a cause to accuse him or even arrest him for breaking the law. While Jesus was bent down, he was writing on the ground. And I will, before I read the rest, notice we talked about this last week and we talked about it before. It says, and all the people came to the temple. Well, no, not all the people came to the temple, but a lot of people came to the temple. And amplification is what this is called. And it is a Near Eastern literary style where they essentially will exaggerate some so that they can emphasize the real point of the story. So I'll talk about that now. All right. All right. Now let's look at the players here and try to get some understanding. Now, okay. People get caught up when says this woman was caught openly in the act of adultery. Okay, now let's not all get disturbed about that, because what it actually is saying is the woman was visibly pregnant. And of course, she wasn't married, she had no husband, she was probably a prostitute. And so when they say caught in adultery directly, and it's not what we think. It's just the woman the woman was pregnant and therefore had to have done an act to get her pregnant. Okay, so the woman also, okay, how do we know uh she how we know she had no husband and she was probably a prostitute? Well, number one, she would not be out in public by herself or talking to anybody, because that was not the custom. However, and when we say that she was a prostitute, let's go back to the way that the women's status in the ancient Near East. Women, all right, there was no, women had no means of support, and they all had to be, um, they all had to be married in one form or another. Their parents, and remember that men had many wives, okay? And though there were laws that said that if a man was going to, quote, separate or divorce from his wife, then he had to give her papers and whatnot. But by this time, just like in many other areas, the law was weak and not enforced, and so So this woman, more than likely, and of course um, they were prosecuted for being a prostitute or whatever. But if a man and then it was done had put her away, then prostitution, I'm sorry, but it is in the Bible, prostitution was um, the only source of income. And then they had all the laws. Well, once you were defiled by another man, then more than likely this woman's situation was kind of hopeless. And she probably would have, just like today, she probably would have had to support herself and a child that was born. So, um, am I being an advocate for women here? Yes, I am. Okay. Uh, okay. So the men. All right. The scribes and the Pharisees. These were the religious and governmental authorities, um, and they were, because this isn't the right word, but religiously uh, followed the law. Okay, only in some cases though. And remember, we just talked about that they were constantly um, these people were constantly uh, scrutinizing Jesus, attacking everything that he did and said, because they were looking for an opportunity to arrest Jesus, which of course they finally did um, before the crucifixion and whatnot. But this is what he faced. This is what Jesus faced, and throughout the Gospels, throughout his ministry. And why? Because he wasn't challenging and saying that the Ten Commandments were not valid. He really wasn't even saying that some of the laws of Moses weren't necessarily not valid, but there was no compassion for the people. There and he said that he came to fulfill the law. And what he meant was, okay, the laws are there, but they need to be guided by love and compassion and mercy. And that just was not taking place, as you'll see here. So so what happened here is this, the scribes and the Pharisees, they called themselves quoting the law to Jesus. All right. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And we'll talk about that bottom one too. Now, it says that Jesus was writing on the ground. They brought the woman and they challenged Jesus and said, okay, this woman should be stoned. What do you say? All right. Now, Jesus was faced with trying to figure out what he was going to say, because either way, if he said, of course, if he said she should be stoned, well, okay, but then the woman was going to suffer. And if he outwardly just said, no, I don't agree with you, then he was going to be in trouble too. So what did he do? He was writing on the ground, but he was not writing a sentence, words that you could read and see what he did. He was doodling. And by doodling, what I mean is, it's like it's like scribbling when you're talking, when you're talking on the phone, or you might be talking with a long-winded person, or you might be have been put on hold, and you just sit there and you just scribble or whatever, and it kind of takes it just kind of takes you away from whatever the issue is. You're just waiting, but it is like a meditative state, basically. Okay. And that is what Jesus was doing. So no long sentences or discourses, just doodling and meditating. But mostly what he was doing. Now remember, Jesus was guided by God the whole time. Okay, the whole time in his ministry. So he was doodling, he was in a meditative state, and he was listening for God to tell him what he should do. Okay. Um, Now, so the crux of the story here is the men said, okay, here's this woman, women like her should be stoned. Okay. Well, Jesus, Jesus, of course, knew the law backwards and forwards. Remember, Jesus studied the Torah, the prophets, whatever, when he was growing up before he became the rabbi that he was. And so he knew the original law. And I quoted these two verses to emphasize that the law really, when it came to adulterers and adulteresses, it always said they will surely both will be stoned. Okay, so I'll just quickly read this from Leviticus 20, 10 through 12. And the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, even he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And then it goes on in Deuteronomy, if a man is found lying with another's wife, then both of them shall surely die. So that's what Jesus knew. Okay, but he had to figure out a way that he could get this point across without getting into an argument, a debate, or getting arrested. So when they were through questioning Jesus, Jesus straightened himself up and said to them, "He who is among you without sin, let him first throw a stone at her." And again, as he bent down, he wrote on the ground. All right. He was doodling again, waiting to see what would happen, even though he pretty much knew what would happen, but he was just waiting, doodling. And when they heard it, these were the men, the scribes and the Pharisees, and when they heard it, they left one by one, beginning with the elders, and the woman was left alone in the midst. Now, so why did these men just kind of leave? He who is without sin. Well, the key here is any of those men could have been with this woman. And in our vernacular, could have been the father of that child. But that of course wasn't the major emphasis back then. And but And those elders, those men, they knew the law also, but once again, the laws had been weakened. Men, uh, like I say, men could do anything they wanted with their wives, and the women there was no respect. But they knew too that they could be stoned also. So, and again, if Jesus had responded that she should not be stoned, well, then he would be breaking the law, and they could have arrested him. All right, so the men just left one by one, and when Jesus straightened himself up, he said to the woman, "Where are they? Did no man condemn you?" She said, "No man, Lord." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go away, and from henceforth do not sin again." Okay, a short story here, but has a lot of a lot of meaning um, about Jesus and his teachings. Um, and if you're familiar with the Gospels or whatever, you will see that Jesus condemned no one. Okay, Jesus came not to condemn, but to forgive and restore people. And the other thing about Jesus' ministry compared to Christianity today, Jesus did not teach or talk about sin. Okay. And of course, Jesus never wanted sacrifice. That was the thing that this woman, all right, uh, according to the traditions of the time, Jesus could have said, "Well, you need to go to the temple, and you need to sacrifice and all of that." But Jesus didn't believe in that, and um, so he forgave her, but he didn't condemn her. Now, nowadays in Christianity, you many denominations, you really gotta you gotta repent. You gotta uh, just get down on hands and knees and say, "I'm sorry." Jesus wasn't like that, and so he didn't condemn her. He didn't condemn her or ridicule her. He showed compassion and mercy because, you know, think about what that woman, I mean, here she was in the midst, in they were in the temple, and we don't know how many people were there, but a lot of people. And she had to be scared to death. And so, but Jesus showed compassion and mercy for her. And um actually I think he did pretty well with the men too, because he could have accused them. But and in addition, there's a little bit of justice. The woman got justice because, let's face it, and we see it today. We see it today. Women who are raped, they'll go to court and they'll say, "Well, she asked for it, the man." It's so, to me, this story we can relate to, that kind of stuff so good. So so there was some justice that Jesus demonstrated. Okay, that's what Jesus did. He had he had many teachings, and we've studied many of them, and they all have to do with love and compassion and mercy. And he demonstrated those teachings. He set the example for us to do. So anyway, Jesus demonstrated his teachings, and we got the mercy and the compassion and the justice there in that situation. But it just came to my mind the other thing about Jesus, doodling and not not getting um, not getting anxious or angry over the men and whatnot. And so I recalled this scripture, and it just again it's Jesus showing us these things right here in these 11 verses. So James 1:19, therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So that's a lesson for us. And I think, of course, the mercy, the compassion, I think we all learn from that. So that concludes the lesson, and we all thank you for your contributions. All right, so I just put this up here tonight so we'd have something to talk about. Now we all know the good news of the gospel, right? Well, I think there's many, well, I think there's many Christians that don't really understand the good news of the gospel, the gospels. And so, and the other thing too is that, remember, Jesus went to the oppressed, the down and out. He, just like this woman, the prostitutes, the sinners, whatever. That's where Jesus went, and that's where Jesus' teachings were accepted. And so I just put this out here. How do you think the woman felt? And she was introduced to the good news of the gospels. And but so just food for thought. How do you think that woman felt? We know in the beginning she had to have been scared to death. But after Jesus said this to her, forgave her, this is just food for thought.